Welcome to Work Trends RU, presented by the Hildreth Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. In this podcast, we speak with experts, policymakers, and thought leaders about issues affecting work, education, training, the economy, and well-being. Each episode of Work Trends RU provides insights into important topics like changes in the job market, economic challenges, and how artificial intelligence is shaping the future of work. Our guests share their thoughts and reflections on how public and private sectors can better address the needs of workers, job seekers, and employers. Join us as we discuss the evolving landscape of work and education on Work Trends RU.
Welcome to Work Trends RU. I'm Carl Van Horn. I'm the director of the Hildreth Center for Workforce Development and a professor at Rutgers University. Today, we're very pleased to have James Moore, who's principal at KPMG, as our guest. Welcome, James. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Carl. Thanks for having me.
In addition to his very important experience and work now, he's also a member of the National Advisory Board of the Hildreth Center for Workforce Development, and we certainly appreciate his assistance there. James, you've done a lot of work over your career. It's very important. You've led workforce programs and advised managers and leaders at all levels of government, state, local, federal. And so I know it's hard to summarize a career like yours, but from your perspective, what do you think has been the greatest impact of the work, the things that you're really most proud of or that you like to think about when you reflect on all the work you've done?
Carl, thank you for that question. When I reflect on the roles and responsibilities I've had, and you mentioned I've had the privilege of working at every level of government, local, state, and federal. I served as the deputy director in D.C. for their workforce development program. I had the pleasure of working in New Jersey as the deputy commissioner for labor. And I also had the pleasure working at the federal level during both the Obama administration as a senior policy advisor during the first term and as a deputy secretary for policy during the second term. And for me, I think about the frontline staff, right? We can build all the greatest technology. We can have all the greatest strategies. We can have the most impactful labor market information. But building capacity at every level of the system is extremely important, ensuring that the frontline staff have the necessary tools and resources to be able to translate those policies into action, ensuring that those individuals have the right, not only mindset, but building a culture within the organization that allow the frontline staff to be more responsive to the needs of job seekers. I think that's critically important. We spend a lot of funding on developing and workforce programs, invested in workforce programs. I think a critical part of that is ensuring that we invest in the frontline staff, ensuring that they have the necessary resources to inform job seekers. We focus a lot on labor market information. We think about, designing a program that is human-centered design. Again, that's focused on putting the experience of the job seekers and their aspiration at the forefront. But with all that, I think having a well-trained, diverse, empathetic frontline staff is the most important thing we can do. Those are the ones that the job seekers see when they come into the center. Those are the ones they interact with when they call the call centers. Ensure that those individuals have the tools and resources and training that they need to effectively impact job seekers.
That's an interesting and important point. And one of the issues I've been concerned about for many years is that there's really not the same clear career path into those jobs as there are in any other job. But in workforce, there's just not that training program at the college or graduate level in most places to create that pipeline for people that go into those jobs.
You're absolutely correct, Carl. And as I reflect on that statement, when you think about the individuals and that role is critically important. I think it's one of the most important roles within the workforce system, and to really think about that there isn't a clearly defined career pathways from K-12 through college, that there's a degree that you can go off and now be a case manager in a workforce system. It's something that's really needs to be addressed. I mean, there's credentials you can take once you find your way into those jobs, but there's not a clearly defined pathway of training that will prepare an individual once they graduate from college or either community college and walk into those jobs. So that to me is a gap that needs to be filled because again, to me it's one of the most critical important roles within the workforce system because again, they're the ones that are interacting with the job seekers or those individuals who are unemployed. They're meeting folks when they're probably at some of the most desperate times of their lives. They just lost a job and have to take care of their families, so that being able to be empathetic during those times, being able to navigate the maze of WIOA and all the other workforce system, be able to think through the referrals that are required. That's a special person. And to not have a clearly defined occupation for that is something we definitely need to think about and address.
There were attempts historically to do this. There were regional training labs years and years ago. Universities and other institutions coordinated them. It was modeled somewhat on the education labs around the country. But again, thinking about that, you mentioned obviously one important thing that needs to be improved. What are some of the other issues in terms of assistance for job seekers you think should be fostered?
I think we used the term modernize workforce systems and infrastructure quite a bit. It was the common theme during the pandemic, need to modernize the UI system because of the aging infrastructure. I think hasn't been a deliberate effort to really not only modernize the unemployment system along with the workforce system, but also the referral system to all the other social services. It's still very fragmented. There's data that's isolated in one organization. For many reasons, those data can't be shared for either federal or state requirements around data sharing. I understand the privacy to protect individual data, but that fragmented data, I think, limit the ability for the system to be able to, with ease, refer you to a particular service that a job seeker may need. The workforce system, many states are operating, especially on unemployment, in very dated systems. I think another component is the actual, even within WIOA, the employment services and the training side really are somewhat disconnected. When you go into a one-stop center, sometimes folks will say, well, I'm ES and, I'm Title II and they should be seen as one synonymous unit and they don't. So I think removing those barriers within the organization would be key. I think a stronger alignment with labor market data, not just the data that's required to be collected from the BLS, but also work with employers, pulling that information in to understand what their needs are, there's just a ton of new techniques, leveraging AI to be able to scrape data from the internet to get some real-time information on what the actual jobs or credentials are and how that information can then inform the design of workforce and training program. And again, in this environment, I think it's even more greater that we have access to these programs and removing any barriers so that individuals who truly need these services don't have to go through many hoops and hurdles to gain access to the services. We kind of touched on it again, but definitely, professionalizing the actual workforce field so that those frontline staff have the right training to support and deliver high quality.
Yeah, you mentioned AI, and that's obviously the topic everywhere. That what can we do with AI? Have you worked with any states, localities that are trying to apply AI to the workforce program?
I haven't directly. What I'm mostly aware of is they're buying services from vendors that have AI-enabled tools, whether it's being able to assess the individual resume to align them to job openings to predict where they are a better fit, referral services, individuals coming into the workforce system with many barriers and being able to predict the likelihood of that person being successful and then prescribing the appropriate training. So, but I'm not aware of a state designing a tool to help facilitate that connection between being unemployed and employed or reskilling or upskilling job seekers. But I can tell you at KPMG, we are working on an interesting tool for the RECEO program, still in early development. And this was born out of a evaluation we were doing for a couple of states. And we noticed that the time from orientation to interview to developing the individual employment plan to creating a really responsive, customized labor market information was a challenge. And it's a challenge for many reasons. One, just the scheduling. You have 7 to 9 hours in a day to get a person in for the orientation, or you can just put it online, they watch a video. The 7 to 8 hours a day to get a person in for an interview, and then the pure magnitude of the number of individuals that need to have those one-on-one interviews just took a lot of time. And then when we just talked a lot about training, and then there's different skill levels. So for one individual to be able to assess that interview questions and develop a really robust individual employment plan. It depends on their training and skill level. And even more so when you need to develop a customized labor market information. So what we are currently working on is an AI tool, the conversational bot that you have a conversation with. So when you log into your profile, it actually gives you the complete spill of what you're required to do while you in the Recio program, from the work search to all the activities that are required. And then it's transitioned to the actual interview. And then from that interview, it produces a very detailed individual employment plan based off not only your profile, but the profile of other individuals that had some success, from the actual traditional stuff in the IEP to recommendations for training. And then it ties it back to that individual labor market information, tell you, are you facing a ton of competition in your labor market? If you are, maybe reconsider that occupation, and maybe there's something that's somewhat related, a related field with greater opportunities, and here's the training path for you to go down to be able to get that. We are really excited about it. It's still in this infant stage. We're working through some of the kinks, but we've presented it to a number of states, and they really like the ability to be able to have that type of technology. And the neat thing about it, it becomes a very effective tool to allow staff to focus on those individuals who are the hard to serve, as opposed to, individuals who can navigate the system themselves. So now staff can really be dedicated to a lot of hand holding for individuals who have more barriers, more challenges, are more difficulties getting connected. And those that who are internet savvy can go through the program, meet all the requirements with the aim of helping them quickly facilitate getting a job.
The other, I think, exciting thing about that is to give people some realistic expectations about what can happen, because people don't understand, as we were alluded to earlier, the career pathways, as we call it. So let's say they want to be a chef because they've seen cooking shows, but they don't realize that prior to that, there's a path before you ever get to that position. So I think that would be very helpful for people. And also, it's probably easier in some ways to get that advice directly from something you're looking at on the internet than it is to have a person across the table from you say, you're not going to be a chef for 10 years unless you do these things.
Absolutely.
So how do you see the whole workforce world interacting with the businesses and the business community? Obviously, most people who hire are very busy. They're not all large corporations. They tend to be small, medium-sized businesses. And there's lots of talk about how do we involve business. But what's your experience about what actually works that gets businesses engaged and creates both opportunities for them and for the people who are applying for work?
I think there's two things, really. One is, for a smaller business, I think they should definitely leverage the workforce system as an extension of their HR system. Definitely have them screen potential candidates for work, and also identify what are some of the changing landscape that they should be aware of. I think for larger, mid-sized, larger employers, small as well, engage as co-creators. I think that's a missed opportunity where we don't have that insight from employers on their specific skill needs and having them participate and the development of a training program, and also encouraging those employers to offer some work-based learning opportunities so that it's beneficial to both, right? I mean, there's a lot of OJT opportunities that I think employers don't take advantage of, that the system can offset their costs, almost like try before you buy it. And I think the workforce system don't do a good job of pulling information from employers to understand where they're going, not where they're currently at in that cycle of hiring, where they're going. What are their needs a year, 5 years out? Because there's some latency in how you build and the time it takes to build a particular training program. And then there's also the requirements of if it's not on the ETPL, you got to wait. So I think the sooner those interactions and conversations happen, the more responsive the workforce system can be for employers, but also getting the employers around the table to share that information. I think both investment in upskilling and reskilling is important. And we just talked about automation and AI and having employers inform the workforce system how they're leveraging AI. Just think about, years ago, I was talking to a state DOT, and their hiring needs are totally different than it was 10 years ago, because now you have autonomous vehicles. So you're not Now you need a different skill set to understand how autonomous vehicles interact or impact the work that they're doing. So the evolution of how technology is changing the way employers work is also should be changing how the workforce system think about training the next generation of workers.
On the research side, what message do you have for researchers of what they should be focusing on to help improve these programs?
I think translating research into practice. I remember many times in my days on the second floor in the Francis Perkins building, we would have these great policy debates. And I would say, that's great in theory, not practical, right? You can solve any problem on a whiteboard almost, but it's just something that can be actionable or action in the workforce system. And I think that's important for researchers to not only think about just the ones and zeros when they're coding stuff, but also getting that insight from the folks on the ground who's actually have to deliver these new or innovative policies that's been shaped in DC or at a university. And I think one of the greatest things that DOL pushed for in many of the training programs are program evaluation and producing that evidence and understanding how a particular component of a training program is impactful and it's really moving the needle. And then I think longitudinal outcomes are important. Just that, short-term snapshot serves a purpose, but understanding 3, 4, 5 years down the road, how those programs are impacting and having the data to go back to determine how the design of that program made a difference and could it be replicated or scaled in other places. And then studying the impact, we just mentioned AI, studying how AI and automation is going to just change the workforce dynamics and the training needs. So those are 3 things I would say. Focus on things that can be actually put into action, leveraging longitudinal analysis and making sure that pushing for data that can be looked at over a number of years, and then studied how this new technology is going to impact the way we do work and how we do work and where we do work.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure that when you're dealing with some of the folks that you provide service to, you bring to that conversation your knowledge of the research that's being done. How do you persuade them that this is worth trying? Because they haven't done it. There's an old saying, it's not made here, right? If we didn't do it ourselves, we're skeptical. So something was done in Nebraska, but hey, it's not going to work in New Jersey or vice versa. Do you have those conversations, and how do you persuade people they should try something new?
I think the best way to encourage individuals to take a leap of hope or faith when it comes to investing in a new technology, obviously you want to say that it's a proven practice, because the workforce system, the first thing they ask you when you walk in and do a pitch is, where have you done this before? That's number one, right? So you need that automatic, I would say, street credibility to get in the door. And secondly, to your point, well, not even is New Jersey different from Pennsylvania, but they would tell me North Jersey is different from South Jersey, right? But the way you get around that is breaking it down to bite-sized pieces and adding that uniqueness of that entity or that region into the equation and helping them understand with really specific details that whatever we're pitching to you, whether it's a new approach to serving a difficult population or leveraging a new technology to facilitate the customer journey, is telling a story with that individual customer in mind and not using being extremely general that just because it worked in North Jersey or worked in South Jersey is going to work here. It's being able to understand and speak to what are some of their specific challenges and how that technology will address that challenge. And again, going back to being able to evaluate and show that you are moving the needle is important. And then there will be times where you're going to encounter some challenges and difficulties that the outcomes may not generate at the level that you expected, but that you make improvements to the system overall. What do we learn from that process? What have we learned from the work we've done in other states that we can then apply to your state so we don't make the same mistakes? I think those are the conversations you want to have. I think being upfront and truthful is ultimately important as well.
So you have mentioned some of the projects that you're working on. Are there any others that you and your colleagues at KPMG are developing that you're hoping will be used by state and local workforce organizations?
There's a couple where we did an assessment of the workforce ecosystems. We interviewed job seekers, the K-12, community college, training providers, employers from different sizes, small, medium, and large in the state, the workforce system practitioners, our frontline staff, supervisors and managers, and also the state staff. And they all have a different view of the world, right? So we gave them 4 or 5 different policy initiatives in this particular state. When you looked at the responses, thematic analysis of it, everyone viewed it different. So that tells us up front that if you view it different, when you put into practice, you're going to deliver it different. So there was a need to do some alignment in thought and in practice. But also we looked at the geographical distribution of the AJCs in the state and the types of individuals that were coming in, coupled with the population in those regions. And we saw some real disturbing trends of there was segments of population within that geographical commuting distance that was just not using the system for many reasons. So that was an important data point. We looked at the transportation nodes in that particular state and realized that, one, if you didn't have a vehicle, you did not have a job because you just could not get to work. We looked at the child care facility locations in that particular state and realized if James needs to be at work at 7 in the morning, the child care center didn't open till 7, there's no way James can get to that job and drop the kid off and get to their work location. So coupled with all that, we were able to show that what were some of the challenges and opportunities to help move the needle on better connecting folks. Now, we can't build new roads overnight, but you could build satellite centers in other government buildings that folks can go and get service. You can relocate staff to a closer proximity for folks to get to. You can't move jobs, but you could convince employers that some of those jobs can be done remotely so that James doesn't have to have the challenge or barrier of trying to get his child to a child care center and then get into work. So those are some of the things, just that one project, which I was really excited about because it was really cool to do, but you can then use data along with responses to those, like this really cool mix of qualitative data and quantitative data really being infused. The response we got from job seekers on their challenges, from the frontline staff on their misunderstanding or not complete understanding of policies and programs in the state, and how just some simple alignment in how you communicate that information, not only to job seekers, but to employers. There's a ton of service in the state that the employers weren't really sure that the state offered and the state offered. So just breaking down those silos of misinformation or lack of information, getting to the right people, and then being able to show what are some of the infrastructure bottlenecks that, just preventing folks from being successful, and what are some of the things you can do, like simply putting a kiosk in a library that a person can go in who don't have internet access in their home to apply for jobs, to check on benefits and things of that nature. So just some was low-tech solutions, some was high-tech solution. But again, having that full understanding of what the system itself faced and what could be done in the short term to address it, that didn't cost a lot, just some realignment of resources. And then what could be done to really affect change in a more long term. So it was that marriage of the research informing the operation, which is always great.
Well, you've talked about a lot of good work that you and your colleagues at KPMG are doing and will be doing. Now I'd like a shift to something more personal about yourself, and that is we ask all the people on Work Trends to talk about their first job. People usually have memories of that, whether it's good or bad. And what I'd like to know is, what was your first job for pay or not for pay? And, what are some of the lessons you got there and that you carry through with you today?
My first job for pay, me and my cousin started a lawn service. So we would go door to door, knocking on the neighbor's house and ask to mow their lawn over the summer to make money for the school year. So that was always very interesting because I grew up in Mississippi, so I imagine the summers are very, very hot. And then pushing the lawnmower, for not only just to go seek out potential customers, but that to actually do the work was even more. So I learned that to be resilient and to work hard as a teenager. My first job for pay in a structured work environment was with Walmart. And Walmart in the South was a great job. When Sam Walton was still at the helm, where he really had a respect for the frontline staff, where even part-time workers at the time had a 401k. You had stock options at Walmart. When I was 17, 18 years old, I worked for Walmart through my senior year in high school, throughout college. And it's amazing how the shift in the mindset of when Sam was at the helm to when he, fortunately passed and his sons and daughter took over the operation. They went from focus more on the bottom line than focusing on the people. And when I was in college, I was in ROTC and I worked at Walmart. So I had a choice to make. I'm going to just go be in the military for 20 years or go be a manager at Walmart, because the managers at Walmart, I knew very well. They made pretty good money at that time. So I could be a regional manager and I could make $200,000 a year. And this was like in the early 90s. But that since changed. But what I learned while working there was to focus on the customer. I started off as a stockman, so my job was to really just go and restock the shelves. And then I moved to a sales clerk in the electronics department. And then just being able to anticipate the customer need and be attentive and really help them understand, that they're making this large purchase for either a television or back then was a VCR player. To me, discipline and focused on making sure that help the customer navigate the different decisions they had to make, but also being attentive to their needs and responsive to their needs. And was always got joy in that.
And you also grew up on a farm, right? And I imagine you weren't paid for the work you did there, right?
No, I was not paid. No, that was. I think when I say really learn hard work, I would invite all my friends down on a Sunday to help me with my chores. I would call it like mail bonding a competition. So all my firewood had to split for the week. All the hay I had to stack for the week. I would call it a competition to see who could stack the highest bales of hay. So literally, they would do all my chores for me. So I did learn I learned my leadership skills and some how to delegate to others.
Thank you so much, James, for sharing your experience with us and the lessons and the really exciting work that you're doing at KPMG. And as always, it's a pleasure talking with you and look forward to learning more about what you're doing in the near term. Thank you very much.
Garth, thank you for this opportunity. Truly enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Work Trends Are You, where we explore the issues affecting the future of work, education, and how the workforce can be better supported by both the public and private sectors. Tune in next time as we continue our conversations on the evolving landscape of work and education.